Good evening, good day, good afternoon. This is Dr. Juan Ramon Aviles Morales from Taino DNA and Genealogy. And today I'm going to talk about a very touchy subject. This PowerPoint is going to be called Why Taino. And I'm just going to go over my admixture and talk about the different heritage and how there's equity amongst them. So you will see from my heritage, or from my admixture of where my ancestral ties could be geographically. There's Portugal, which is the largest concentration, is 30%. Spain is 27. Puerto Rico, indigenous Puerto Rico, is 11%. Cameroon, Congo, 6%, and England, or what is the United Kingdom today, is 5%, and France 3%. So I just want to share some data with you, and so we could compare and contrast. If we look at Portugal, which is 30% of my mixture, we see that Portugal has, it's found on the western part of Europe. It has a language of Portuguese. It's a small country, but it does have a population of 10 million people. It has a capital, and it has a form of government, and it is recognized as a member of the United Nations. So that's Portugal. Spain, similar. You will notice it's right next to Portugal. It has its own flag, has its own system of government, its capital, has a population of 47 million. All this data is obtained from Wikipedia, by the way. If you want to look it up, I just took it directly from the Wikipedia Spain or Portugal or whichever country. So that's my source. Okay. So Spain has, of course, Spanish as the official language, and it's recognized as a member of the United Nations. Cameroon is located in Western Africa. Uh, it also has its own form of government. It has a capital. It has a population of greater than 26 million. It's a pretty decent sized country, and it has its languages, native languages, but officially English and French are the spoken languages that are recognized, the official languages of that country. It is also recognized as a member of the United Nations. I do have admixture from Wales, England, and Scotland and Ireland. So, um, well, not really Ireland, excuse me, I take that back, but mostly the countries that would form the United Kingdom. So instead of putting England, I put the United Kingdom up here. Same thing I want to point out to you, it has a capital, population of 60 million, I'm sorry, 67 million, over than 67 million people. It's a decent sized country. Uh, it has its own language, and is also recognized by the United Nations. Bear with me on this, okay? France is 3% of my admixture. It's also in Western Europe. The language of obviously is French. It's a recognized country by the United Nations. It's a decent size, and it has a population of greater than 67 million. And it has its own form of government. It has its flag, and it also has its boundaries, its borders. Now, I also have European Jews, probably from the Kazakhs. And by the way, European Jews are aware that they're not Asian, that they are European. They're not Middle Eastern, rather. But they were accepted into the state of Israel, so they are Jewish. So they have their own set of government. They have their capital. Their population is greater than 9 million. It's a small country located in the Middle East. Its language is Hebrew, and it is also recognized as a member of the United Nations. Senegal. Now, I did the top 10 admixtures I did it all the way up to 2%. After 2%, I did not include those. There are, I think, three other populations. But hear me out on this one. So Senegal is in Western Africa. It's also recognized by the UN. Its language is French. It's a pretty decent sized country. Has a population of greater than 15 million. It has its capital and its borders, recognized international borders, and its flag. The Basque in Spain they're not a separate country. There are actually 7 provinces split between Spain and France that are semi-autonomous, but they do not have their own form of government, or independent government rather. Their government would be in the province level. They do speak their own language, Euskara. It's a pretty significant piece of land, and it has a population of about 3 million. They're not recognized by the United Nations, yet they have their own language. There are some borders, not separate from the countries where they're located, but their provinces are recognized. And as I stated earlier, they speak their own language. They have their own institutions. They have their universities. They have their colleges, their hospitals that are Basque. They also have their own flag. Next one is Mali, which is 2% also. It's a very large country, has its own flag, its own form of government, has a capital, greater than 20 million people. And as I mentioned, it's a large country, and the languages are Arabic and French, and it is also recognized by the UN. Then, lastly, North Africa is the last admixture I'm going to mention, and it's 6 countries. It's Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, and Egypt and Sudan. These make up Northern Africa. The Maghreb or Arab uh, population is pretty significant, 246 million. It's a pretty large, very large piece of land, and the language is Arabic. Okay, multiple nations are recognized as the ones I mentioned earlier. Uh, so, why did I bring this up? I would like to contrast. A lot of people from Puerto Rico say that um, why they ask me why do I put that I am Taino and do not acknowledge my Spanish and African sides. I do acknowledge them. I am proud to be of my Spanish heritage. I am also proud of my African heritage. I am researching all three of my heritage, but as I demonstrated, the playing field is not leveled. The Tainos do not have a formal government. There is no they have informal tribal communities called Yucayeques led by a cacique. There's no capital. According to some studies done in the early 2003, there was estimated that greater than 60% of the population in Puerto Rico was found to have uh, Taino descent or some DNA from the Tainos. So that could be greater. Puerto Rico has about 3 million, so half of that will be 1.5, and then the diaspora easily go over 2 million. There's no country, there's no language, and it's not recognized by the UN. So the Tainos are not even anywhere close to our African and European counterparts in regards to our heritage. Um, we have no language, and people say, "Oh, you can't call yourself Taino." Well, I beg to differ on that. I think that if I have an oral tradition, I have DNA evidence, I have documented evidence from historical records such as birth certificates and what have you. So there is a historical background that I can claim to be Taino. It's in my blood. It's my right. I claim it. And just as people have the right to claim their gender or what they want to be called or what have you in our society, there's a great movement towards people being able to identify themselves as they choose. So I choose to identify as Taino. And let me further illustrate why. If we look at our heritage, you will see the European is the dominant culture. Puerto Rico, Spanish is the common language, and if not Spanish, English, which are all European. No African language is spoken, no indigenous language is spoken officially. So the heritage also seems to be favoring European also. Uh, there are multiple instances where you have genealogical societies that cater to multiple European sites or countries. So you'll have multiple genealogical sites that cater to the different provinces of Spain. Uh, there's a lot of festivals, a lot of cultural ties to Spain. Yeah, you see a little bit of that with the African heritage. In Loiza, there's a historical connection to our African heritage, the bomba and other dances and what have you, religious uh, and heritage with the Santeria and um, other influences from our African heritage. It's there, and it's not as prevalent as the European, but it's definitely more prevalent than the indigenous. I'm sure there's room for disagreement here, but if we look at it overall, I want to show you something in the next couple of slides that illustrate this. And then some might ask, why am I focusing on just indigenous? It's quite simple. No one, they have been marginalized and they don't have a voice. I want to be that voice for my ancestors that were attempts made to silence them through paper genocide. When I was researching my family history, uh, many of the entries for them, even though they were indigenous or mestizo, they were labeled as white. There was an active attempt by the government to wipe the memory out of the indigenous population. Whether you want to accept this or not, this is a fact. I mean, it has been proven. I did publish a paper, and I'm waiting for it to be formalized, and it talks about the cultural genocide against native heritage in Puerto Rico and throughout the Caribbean. What can we do to equalize? So, going back to restoration of the indigenous land, so La Indiera near Maricao was given to the Taino and later was taken, which should be returned. Not all of the land, but at least part of it to the modern descendants. And then finally, inclusion in the political discourse, allowing for the Tainos to have some participation in the political process of Puerto Rico. That would be a whole PowerPoint in itself. And the same can be discussed with the African heritage, do a cultural identity, have language instruction, different languages, for example, Yoruba language or any other tribal, African tribal languages that can be taught for those who want to delve deeper into their African heritage, and also inclusion of those who are of African heritage into the political discourse also. Now, for those of you who might say, well, things are equal and what have you, when you do a genealogical research, you look for resources. When you look up the European, there's so many pages. Most of these are from, I think up to here are from Spain, and there are Portuguese one also, and there is, I have it listed over here. Uh, there are multiple English. I mean, there are quite a significant amount of information out there to search your European um, roots. But when you go and look at your African, it's a lot less. Uh, it could be also because the African countries don't have a system in place until recently for documentation. But even then, um, there are much less, but there are some sites that will help you. Documentation of the slaves, where they came from, and there are certain sites that you can look up that will point you in the right direction to look. It's definitely a lot less than what's found for the European. But when we look at the Taino, not much. I mean, there's our group Taino DNA. We focus solely on the Taino heritage, solely on that, would be Taino DNA. And also, Dr. Parada wrote a book that unapologetically talks about our roots as indigenous people. I mean, he does a great job and he makes no excuse. He is not ashamed of his roots. And I commend him. It's a great book, and I would recommend people to read it. It's called Taino DNA and Revitalization. They have it on sale on Amazon. It's a great book, great resource. But it's one of the few that are available. Unfortunately, there are not more, and I'm hoping in the future there will be more resources for people to search their Taino heritage in the form of genealogy. Well, I would like to thank you all for listening. I ask that you all go to our YouTube channel, and if you haven't done so already, to subscribe to our channel and support us. We appreciate your help. Thank you.